Okay, welcome back everyone. My name is Isidora Collar and I'm the strategy director at the Atlas Society International. If you're interested to learn more about what we do and all of our programming, you can find us outside in the hall. I want to introduce today Dr. Richard Saltzman, who you've already met, for his workshop, The Objectivist Perspective on Corporate Governance, Shareholder versus Stakeholder Capitalism.
Great, thank you. Welcome. Now, you can tell from this title that it sounds very corporate. It sounds very business-oriented. It sounds very finance, econ. Any econ finance majors, students? Okay, okay, but for those of you who aren't, I want to incentivize you by saying this also pertains to governing your life and your body and your mind and your personal property. I'll come back to this later, but if you remember during COVID, there was a cry where people would say, my body, my choice. Like, that usually comes from the reproductive choice movement, but this was people, hey, I shouldn't have to get the jab. That is an issue of governance. Do you own yourself? And does ownership include controlling yourself without others controlling you? So that is the same topic as I'm giving you. So it's not just all about corporate, although a lot of it is corporate. This is actually based on a chapter in my book, so I'm going to keep plugging this book, Stakeholder, Capitalism. Is a phrase that's about 50 years old, and I'll elaborate, but let's start with what is capitalism. I'm taking this is a summary really of the talk. What's capitalism and how does it differ from rivals? Capitalism entails private ownership and private control, management, in other words, of property. Whereas fascism is a hybrid. I'll show you later a matrix differentiating capitalism from fascism and socialism, but we'll see that fascism is a hybrid. There you have ownership nominally. That's what they had under Nazi Germany. They still had private companies, quote unquote private companies with shares trading on exchanges, but the government was heavily involved in telling them what to do. So legal by title and control exercised by non-shareholders. A shareholder is simply someone who owns the company. So if you right now called up your broker and bought shares in Tesla, it means you're a part owner of Tesla. They call them shareholders. Stakeholders are non-owners. And they're supposed to be able to control the corporation. So that's the real issue here. I'm going to elaborate. But just right up front to get you primed for this, the stakeholder model bifurcates these two things. Bifurcates what two things? Ownership and control. It cuts them in two. It separates them. And I argue that it's an insidious thing because on a superficial level only, it seems as though these companies are still private. And they seem so. They still have their own names. They haven't been nationalized. What does nationalize mean? Well, the government actually takes them over. That's what socialism requires. The nationalization of industry is the government buying it, taking it over, using government bureaucrats to run it. That's not what we have with stakeholder capitalism, which I'm going to show, by the way, is an oxymoron. So I actually hate to keep using this phrase. It's like using the phrase crony capitalism. Capitalism is not cronyist, but it's also not stakeholder. And put another way, shareholder capitalism is redundant. That's the only kind of capitalism there is, one with shareholders and privately owning and controlling the corporation, the property. So this is important because it's dominant, it's becoming more and more the way in corporate governance, which is sad, and it's totally anti-capitalist, and it's against liberty and prosperity. So you have to recognize what it is and be aware of it. The other reason to do this is often, this is true in Atlas Shrugged, you'd see certain companies doing dastardly things, right? But what was Ayn Rand dramatizing? That they were usually pull peddlers, that they were usually non-productive people who were using government favors, right? So that book is not full of all the businessmen are heroes. Some of the businessmen are parasites and swine. So that's part of what's going on here too. That's what I'm trying to show you. Now this is craziness, because I think there's even more than these, but I would call this varieties of capitalism. Have you heard these? We've all heard laissez-faire capitalism. That's what Ayn Rand advocated. Free market capitalism, you hear that from the libertarians. Democratic capitalism. State capitalism sounds like a contradiction in term. Crony is in there somewhere. There it is. Crony capitalism, that's very common today. Why all these modifiers? Responsible capitalism, oligarchic. Oh, they used to call this when the Soviet Union gangster capitalism. Welfare capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism from the libertarians. So this is a mix of libertarians, this is socialists, so welfare statists, trying to Christian capitalism. What is this? What's going on here? Part of it is, and this is kind of interesting, the end of socialism. That's what's going on here a little bit. By the way, the word capitalism, when do you think it was coined? Like, someone knows, 1850, not even by Marx. So the term itself is fairly new. Socialism existed long before. But one of the reasons you're getting all these varieties is that communism collapsed in 91, and the Soviet Union went away. And all the socialists started looking around saying, oh my God, what do we do now? Well, we could become environmentalists and oppose capitalism that way. That's one route. But they all started talking about, oh, the only thing left is capitalism. I can't stand it. So they have to admit that capitalism is the last man standing or the last system standing, but they also hate it. So now they're trying to come up with, I go back here, now they're trying to come up with all these variants to preserve their favorite thing, whether it's the state or the welfare or anarchy, right? So that's what's generating this proliferation of modifiers. See the book on the right, Varieties of Capitalism. See, there's not just one capitalism anymore, and we have to speak about varieties. This book on the left is an entire book about all the false predictions of capitalism collapsing. Written by a Marxist, by the way, who's like, let me give you the history of all the times we said it's going to end, and it never ends. It just keeps going. And this advocate is an egalitarian. Milanovic, capitalism alone. The one left standing. Unfortunately, capitalism is the lone system left. So let's grieve over that and start vivisecting it. So that's part of the reason for that. But let's move to the real meat of this. Who is this guy? Oh, President. I almost forgot about him. Like he forgot about himself. Now, listen to how this is put. Obviously, this was written for him, but just before he won election in summer of 2020, what's he saying? It's way past time we put an end to the era of shareholder capitalism. There was an era. The idea, this is accurate, by the way, the idea that the only responsibility a corporation has is with its shareholders, read owners. That's simply not true. It's an absolute farce. They have a responsibility to their workers, their community, their country. The list is getting long. That's not a new or radical notion, unquote. Actually, it's not. That notion was prominent in Nazi Germany. And this is the beginning of the list that is the stakeholder. Who are these people? Workers, suppliers, the local community. You see what I mean? I work at Tesla, say. I don't own Tesla. I don't have any shares. I work there. I clearly have a stake in the business. It matters to me, so maybe I should have a say in capital spending or hiring decisions or wage decisions, because I have a stake, not a share. See the idea? They shift the language. I'm a stakeholder. What are you, against stakeholders? You see how it dilutes owner? The point is to dilute ownership and control. There's other people in the room that will decide what you do with your property or your body or your company. Okay, but is this not a bipartisan thing? Now, this took me 2 minutes on the internet the other day to find these. Trump berating companies for warning about tariff price increases, telling business world leaders to invest in the US or else. Executive order on drug makers, lower your prices. I can't even keep track of the whole CEOs self-censoring themselves. I better hold my tongue because otherwise the administration will attack me. Trump says he doesn't want Apple building products in India. What is going on here? Is Trump the CEO of these companies? No. Does he own, I mean, he might own shares in them, but he's not speaking as a shareholder, is he? He's speaking as a stakeholder. I have a stake in these businesses because if they don't do well, the economy won't do well, and I might see the argument would be made. But this is clearly not capitalism, especially if you act on this, not just verbally threaten. This is a non-owner, an important, powerful non-owner, because he's got a whole bunch of cabinets behind him who can act on this, who's basically telling companies what to do. So it's really no different than this, although that's more philosophical. Philosophically wrong, but philosophically accurate. Whoever wrote that for him, that is exactly what Stakeholder is. We're not going to put up with this farce of people who own things deciding what to do with it. I couldn't resist, because the minute I put up the Trump, I said, I remember Ben Franklin invented this coin. Can you see what it says on the bottom? This is the famous Fugio cent from 1787. Mind your business. I love that, it's an American expression. We today say, mind your own business. In other words, get out of this is my territory, get out of here. But that was at the bottom of the coin. I love that. Mind your business meant focus on your business and prosper and don't lose attention. But now here's an interesting warning, because this is, if you haven't read this book, you have to read this book by Ayn Rand's protege, Dr. Leonard Peikoff, in 1982. Said, I think the trends I'm seeing are not toward America becoming more socialist, but becoming more fascist. Important to know because that's what the stakeholder model is. I don't even think he mentioned stakeholder in this book, but notice what he's arguing here, that I can't read it from here actually very well, but if you look in the remarkable, this is summary, in this remarkable book, Peikoff maintains that the deepest roots of Nazism lie in three philosophical ideas: the workings of unreason, the demand for self-sacrifice, the elevation of society above the individual. This book is worth reading because fascism is very different, not very different, distinctly different from socialism. And when people like Obama or Bernie Sanders or AOC talk about socialism, it is very easy to look at that and say, you're not actually socialists because you're not actually advocating that the government own the means of production. And so, in a way, if they were honest about it, they'd say, no, we're fascists. Because we're not pro-capitalist, but we definitely want this model. We want this model of the government controlling what people do with their property. Anyway, this is the broader argument, the broader context, and I think it's actually quite prescient, because this was written at the outset of the Reagan years. Reagan had already been elected in 1982. And so the following, I would say 12 years, including Bush Sr., was actually a move toward more capitalism in America. So at first it looked like this forecast wouldn't work out. America was seemingly moving toward capitalism, not fascism, in the 80s and 90s. But I think in this century, we're definitely moving in the direction he predicted. Now, this book is from 1930. And remember I mentioned that the 1930s were a period when nationalism was on the rise, obviously fascism was on the rise. There's an argument, I think a pretty compelling one, that it isn't just the Nazis in Germany, and it certainly includes Mussolini and the fascists in Italy, but a lot of the FDR program, a lot of the New Deal program was doing the same thing. It was trying to cartelize, if you will, the US economy, to the point actually where the New Deal originally was struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. Why unconstitutional? Because it was violating property rights all over the place. At any rate, this book heavily influenced FDR and FDR's advisor. It's called The Modern Corporation and Private Property. And here's, I'm not going to read all this, and if you want the slides later, I'd be glad to send them to you. The argument was capitalism is no longer valid because companies are so big. It was okay when they were small and they had the guy's name on the door, like Ford Motor Company, right? So where you were owner and controlling, right? Henry Ford owned the whole place, and he ran it. The socialists who hate capitalism anyway kind of said, well, that's okay. But what we're noticing is these huge companies, U.S. Steel, General Motors, General Electric. And here the argument was, what has to happen with big companies like that to raise that amount of money, right? For mass production, for a mass market, you need lots of capital. And the family isn't going to be enough, the Ford family. Mr. Ford dies, in fact. You're going to have to go to public shareholders and ask them for money, to convince them, see what I mean, to invest in the company. So the ownership is going to be different now from the managers, right? Because you're a shareholder and you like have another life. You just own a portfolio of shares, say, in Ford Motor Company. And you can vote, by the way. There's shareholder meetings, there's annual meetings, and there's issues that come up. And so you do have control, but you're not managing it every day. Notice? So there's a separation of, there's these managers. The managers might own some shares, but they're not going to be wealthy enough to own most of the company. So that is a capitalist model. There's nothing wrong with that model. It's a model that made big companies possible, and therefore mass markets possible, and therefore affordable products possible. But this faced a critique from the critics, and they basically said, because of this, now watch for this non sequitur, because of this, government should control businesses. Government should control these big corporations, because they're out of control. They no longer are controlled by Mr. Ford or Mr. Carnegie. See, that's a logical leap. That's not really logical. And so it's interesting because they're not questioning the separation of ownership control. They're shifting the control from managers and shareholders to bureaucrats in the government. Well, why am I quoting this? This is 90 years ago. Because this argument was revived heavily in the 70s by Ralph Nader and others. They basically revived this argument. Here's a quick tie, by the way, to the Nazi model. So here's an essay from the American Economic Review. That is the standard economic journal for academic economists in America. But notice where it's from. Was it 1938? 1938. We weren't even at war yet. 1938, the American economists were writing about this German system. How interesting. How interesting, this corporate system developing in Nazi Germany, the German corporation law. And they were fascinated by it. They weren't criticizing it. They weren't saying, watch out, this is a very bad model. This is going to involve the government telling German industry what to do, including, make tanks, not cars, make bullets, not bananas. But it's laudatory here, which is very interesting. And it's based on this modern corporation and private property argument. In 1970, the great Milton Friedman, a free market economist from Chicago, in the New York Times of all places, he won the Nobel in 1976, said, no, I'm going to defend the shareholder model. I'm beginning to see this argument for stakeholder this and stakeholder that. So very courageously, this was not easy to do at the time, he wrote an essay called The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Profits. So he's making fun of the social responsibility of business. You see how the social responsibility argument would be like the stakeholder model? You're not supposed to be so selfish and personal and care about the shareholders only. You're supposed to care about society. You're supposed to be socially responsible. And he said, no, that doesn't mean I want to be irresponsible. It means I want your responsibility to go solely to the owners. And he criticized corporations for not doing that. He criticized CEOs for using their companies for these other purposes other than, making cars and steel and returning dividends to shareholders. So it was very influential. It went against the argument, but it didn't stop the stakeholder movement. It just maybe slowed it for a little bit. Because in business schools and law schools, they increasingly taught stakeholder, and criticized Friedman for being naive and Neanderthal. Oh, this old Oh, this old 19th century model that he's defending. See how it's philosophical, though? Friedman is so pro-selfish. These corporations only serve their owners. How narrow and greedy and irresponsible socially it is to do that. The one on the left, Nader, if you're old enough, you'll remember, he's pushing this idea that the government should run businesses, not nationalize them, but charter them and run them and government will decide who's on the board of directors. Government will decide who's in the C-suite and the corporate suites. A great objectivist, Hessen's the same name that comes up in Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal. Those are essays by Rand, Brandon, Greenspan, and Hessen. So Hessen's the great economist, and he wrote this book in 1979, a fabulous book, In Defense of the Corporation. So the corporation was under attack in the 70s. The corporation is terrible. The corporation is selfish. The corporation is too bottom line oriented. And he defended it, not only philosophically, but economically and legally. He basically said, this is a version of freedom to assemble, freedom to associate. So people want to gather together and create a corporation or create something like the Atlas Society. Why can't people be free to get together, have a mission, raise money, do things to advance the mission? Why is that exploiting anybody? And Hessen said, that's what corporations are. Meanwhile, the libertarians were criticizing him, not just socialists. The libertarians are saying, now these are creatures of the state. The whole idea of incorporating, you have to go down to the government and apply to be a corporation. They thought, on the libertarian side, that corporations were privileged results of the state. So this position, I give you these two because they're two opposite views of the corporation. One on the left, anti-capitalist, the one on the right, pro-capitalist. And he criticized the stakeholder model. Now, who's not heard of this dastardly organization? And is it Switzerland or where are they? In Davos, the World Economic Forum, with Klaus Schwab, who I think is in the last month has been kicked out for some scandal. But it doesn't matter. He's got this book. There it is, Stakeholder Capitalism, written years ago, I think, actually, making the case that, quote, the stakeholder notion isn't new. It began in the 70s. This is me summarizing it. Originating in elite law schools and business schools. For decades, American CEOs actually have embraced this model, which is sad. It's sometimes called CSR, corporate social responsibility. But it's really big in Europe. It's actually bigger in Europe than here. They call it social market economy. So part of the problem of the stuff that comes out of Davos is this underlying model that they have, which is promoting stakeholder, the stakeholder model. I really reject the idea that they call it capitalism, but they're not going to stand up and say, okay, stakeholder fascism, let's go for that. It's got a bad brand. This is just visually some of the ways of looking at it. Look at all these stakeholders: owners, customers, employees, lenders. See, they're not owners, but they have a stake in the business. They should have a say in the business. State and society. So this is, I think, taken from his book, right? So this is how he's conceptualizing it. By the way, when Marx said, capitalism will end when the worker rises up in resentment and expropriates the expropriators. It takes over the businesses, right? And it's violent, and it's immediate, and it's visceral, right? What is this? Backdoor, insidious. It might take many, many years. But in the final analysis, you're still dispossessed. In the final analysis, as a capitalist, you still end up not really owning the thing. Only it doesn't look violent. It looks like people voted for it. At the end of the day, though, it's still separating ownership and control. In this case, the government is in control. Or it's special interest groups, let's admit. It could be the government being told by environmentalists, do this, shut down fossil fuels for Exxon. Put environmentalists on the Exxon board, which they have, that kind of thing. This shows that, what is McKinsey? Anyone know what McKinsey is? A major consulting company for businesses, right? It's pushing the same thing. So the idea that capitalists financially are pro-capitalists ideologically, no. No, this is McKinsey teaching its clients to be stakeholder-minded. That's the consulting firm, McKinsey, anti-capitalist McKinsey model. And here's these CEOs, shareholder values no longer everything. The Business Roundtable, a group, if you know, a group of business people who lobby government. So it's mostly big business. They changed, they made a big announcement, and I think this is 2019, yeah. Big announcement, we're throwing out completely the Friedman model, shareholder model. We've been toying with this other stakeholder model for a while, but now we're really going to be unabashed about it. This is right in the precipice of the COVID stuff. But that was the news at the time, that the Business Roundtable now has officially come out. This was like the final punctuation mark on this whole 50-year movement. We are now all stakeholders, advocates of the stakeholder model. Tim Cook is there. Who's Brian? That's the B of A guy. That's yes. Meg Whitman. Here's a senator. This is going to be a past eventually. They put out these bills. They try to get, it hasn't been passed yet, but Liz Warren, if you don't know her, she's from Massachusetts and she leans left. But she says, I'm not a socialist like Bernie. Bernie's not a socialist either. Neither of you want to nationalize the means of production. But I'm a capitalist. But, there's always buts, right? I'm a capitalist, but I want it to be accountable capitalism. So that's the name of the bill. The bill is Accountable Capitalism Bill. Sounds like it's right out of Atlas Shrugged. It can't be anything about capitalism or accountability because that's what they named it. She wants it accountable to government. The whole point is to institute the Ralph Nader plan from the 70s, to have a government federal chartering, which is short for government will tell businesses what to do, who to hire, but at the senior level. The boardroom, the CEO suite. You got to hire these women. You got to hire these races. You got to hire these environmentalists. And if you don't, we'll take away your tax breaks. We'll trust bust you. So there's a hammer behind this. So her critique is not that executives are currently unaccountable to capitalists because they're accountable to their shareholders, right? Again, this is a shift to, I'm going to call you unaccountable. Why? Because I'm unaccountable to my owners? No, because you're not accountable to me, the politician. But pitched this way, if you oppose this, what do you sound like you're opposing? Accountability and responsibility on the part of executives. Interesting study, a fairly neutral study of Stakeholder, just the name Stakeholder. So she looks it up and she's like, well, let me search the literature for all references to Stakeholder and see what they mean, so I can at least advise CEOs on what they should be doing. She found 435 different definitions. That's a lot. You imagine you're a CEO and you're running a business. You're like, okay, should I care about shareholders plus 434 other groups? Wow, what should I do today? It's crazy. It's basically completely diluting the control of the corporation. So I think it's not coincidental that there's 435 congressmen in Congress. Just coincidental. It's kind of like this. Gulliver being held down by these 435 little Lilliputians. There's some readings. This is for the serious student of Stakeholder. A couple of defenses. This is a defense. So it's not all bad news. There are people pushing back saying, no. Capitalism, corporations, and social contract, we should be defending the shareholder model. Here's the matrix I promised you. 4 different systems, cut 2 different ways. Ownership and control. That's what we've been talking about, right? Whether there's a separation of ownership and control. And notice I say on the right, you could refer to this as the means of production as a socialist would, but you can also refer to it as personal property or your own body. Do you own yourself and control yourself, or is this going to be vivisected? Or are you going to be bifurcated? Capitalism entails private. That's what capitalism is. It's private ownership and private control of property. And socialism is the opposite. The socialists wouldn't disagree with this matrix, by the way. The socialists would say, yes, I want public ownership and control of the means of production. Public to them means the state. That's what nationalization is. All right, but notice where fascism is. Fascism's here. It's private ownership, but public control. And that's why sometimes it's confused with capitalism, because you see shares and you see companies, and they're usually big, because it's easier for government to control big business, right? If you want to tell business what to do, it's nice to call up 3 different businesses instead of 3,000. So it's called sometimes in the literature of academia, corporatism. Fascism is sometimes called corporatism because of that. It's not capitalism, though. All right, I'm going to wrap up here. Capitalism isn't corporatism or cronyism, so I'm critiquing that. That's in the book as well. I summarized just in time. You see my summary? At root, if you hear the phrase stakeholder capitalism, tell people that's an oxymoron. And you say, no, I'm for shareholder capitalism. But I shouldn't have to say that, because that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is a system where the shareholders, the owners, own and control the property. Okay, I hope that's clear. And questions, I think we have how much time?
15 minutes.
15 minutes for questions and comments.
Do you want to?
Yes, you want me to do that?
You want to pace?
Pace.
Thank you. Full disclosure here, I'm a former McKinsey consultant. Here. Full disclosure.
Welcome, McKinsey is here.
But I don't work for them anymore. But I want to know your idea about unadvertised public benefit programs within a capitalism. I can give you an example where it's a private college. They have a food pantry somewhere, but they don't put it in the website. It's very hard to get that information, but they have this kind of a system.
Well, I'm not sure entirely what you're asking, but public benefit, are you talking about like philanthropy by companies?
No, it's like funded by the university for the benefits of students who may not have means to buy their food.
Yeah, it doesn't, on the surface, that does not sound like it's necessarily an anti-capitalist setup. Mm-hmm. I do believe, you see this controversy going on in the US today, I do believe the university should be defunded. You know, the government should not be funding the universities, and therefore, you know, it's an example of, since we pay, we get to tell you what to do. We get to tell you what students to bring in or not, what things to study or not. So the whole research side, at least in American universities, the whole research side has been contaminated and corrupted by government funding. It's partly in science, but it's also in the social sciences. So, but in capitalism, you can have a private university system that even works together with companies and, you know, having a feeder system of students and research labs that are shared and things like that. The problem is it's entangled with government today, in the US at least. I assume that's true in Europe and elsewhere.
Richard, you used laissez-faire capitalism and market capitalism, and then you used shareholder capitalism, and said that those were redundant and you shouldn't have to state them.
Yeah.
Is it a value, or would you say no, it's a problem to do that when that seems to help make it more clear in a given case? And the second case, you also highlighted where Friedman said the purpose is profit. If he had said value creation,
yes,
would that have been more clear to people? Because that's what he meant, but that's not how it's interpreted.
It's a good point. People have quibbled over, I'm not saying you're quibbling, but why is he saying profits? I think that's actually bolder to say maximize your profits, because people think profit is theft. So if he's saying maximize that, he clearly thought profit was value added. But yeah, you could use that broader term, value added, because the shareholders are looking for the stock price to appreciate. And it doesn't always appreciate in lockstep with profits. But I don't think that would have changed the critique. I don't think they would have said, oh, I guess I'm not for stakeholder because Milton used value added instead of profit. It was still fundamentally an anti-private property movement, and still is. And so he was just like a bump in the road here. But I don't think it's terminological in that regard. You know what I mean? That we're not making the case well because we're defending profits instead of shareholder value. The shareholder thing, the thing to remember is most people not in business or finance aren't, I know, Jay, but don't know what a shareholder is. It means an owner. And if you own your car, you have a title to the car, don't you? You have a piece of paper evidencing you own it. That means you decide who drives it. If someone walked up and started driving your car, telling you where to drive it, you'd say, what's going on here? I own this thing. And I alone should decide what to do with it. That's what a shareholder is. So when they bring in this thing called stakeholder, or if I showed up at your door and said, hi, I'm a stakeholder in your car, by the way. I'm a neighbor and I have a stake in whether your car is in this neighborhood or not. It's ridiculous. It might eventually get to this level on the personal property level, but that's where it is on the corporate level. So don't let them get away with this. And they rhyme. They did this purposely. Shareholder, stakeholder. They rhyme for a reason, but they're trying to put one over on you.
Dr. Salzman, I work in finance as part of my day job, so I've seen a lot of just how big of a blight ESG and stakeholder capitalism is.
Yes.
Stakeholder capitalism
ESG is part of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Stakeholder capitalism is about as capitalistic as Elizabeth Warren is Native American. And,
good one. Touche.
I've seen at least like in the last year or two, there seems to have been a meaningful enough backlash against that kind of thinking in many major corporations and especially a lot of smaller ones. Do you feel that trend line is headed in a strong enough direction? And as a second part to my question too, why do you think many of these businesses even agreed to this in the first place and allowed themselves to be controlled?
Who agreed?
A lot of the major businesses that are now pushing this.
Yeah,
why would they agree to it in the first place?
That's a good question. The answer. Let me start with the latter part quickly first. Why would CEOs put up with this? One mistake people make is, and I stress this in my book, a capitalist $, financial or CEO or owner, is not the same thing as a capitalist ideologically. So George Soros is an example, right? Makes money, financier, a lot of money. He's anti-capitalist. Right. Jay Lapierre is a businessman, money, but he's pro-capitalist, right? So it's the Marxist myth. It's actually a Marxist premise that says if you're rich and have money, you're going to be pro-rich and pro-money and pro-systems that create money. That's not true. And the other way of looking at this is the things that are moving these arguments are deeper philosophical, and business schools and law schools are derivative. That if you think about it, they're professions, and they train people for those professions, right? But where do the business people and the law schools get their ideas? From the social sciences, from the politics department, the econ department, the law department, philosophy especially. So here's a philosophy that's very collectivist, isn't it? We're not going to have individual ownership of capital. We're going to have collective control, right? That's collectivism. That doesn't stop at some moat at the business school. That seeps into the business school, that seeps into the professorships and the law schools, and that's where it comes from. I don't know if that helps a little bit, helps you answer your question. It's a good question.
Yeah. Following up on what the last gentleman said, like there has been an overall trend of major corporations like Walmart, JP Morgan, walking away from the woke excesses like DEI and ESG, largely due to pressure from the Trump administration.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know, like, what is the appropriate role, if any, for the government, or do you think there's a better way for these companies to actually embrace the classical shareholder model in their own self-interest?
That's a good question. So the solution to, if you understand what I'm saying, what's causing it, the solution to this would not be to get another political regime in that tries to curb it or ban it. Not only can that be overturned by the next administration, but it's the same principle. It's the same principle of the government saying, we're going to tell businesses how to manage themselves. So that's not fundamentally a solution. And put it this way, if that's the only reason these companies are backing off from ESG, that's not going to be sustainable either, because they'll just wait for him to leave. But I did want to add, since you're both talking about ESG, and if you don't know this acronym, they love their acronyms, don't they? ESG means environmental, social, and governance. Okay, that combined three nasty things, believe it or not, into one. The E part is serve the environment. Stop making fossil fuels, or even banks they'll accuse of. You're lending to a fossil fuel companies that were coming after you. The S part is social responsibility. Well, that was just borrowed from the 70s. That is, do social justice things and hire people on race and sex reasons and all that stuff. And the G thing was governance, which is this. The G part of ESG is do the stakeholder thing, govern, have corporate governance become more social, fascistic. That's what ESG is. They packaged together three terrible things and companies ran with it. I think they're just going to rename this probably. Because if this is truly philosophical and ideological, it's not going to just go away. It's just going to be renamed, maybe renamed and repackaged, which is what ESG was. It used to be CSR, corporate social responsibility. And they dropped CSR, and now they have ESG. And the goal is the same. It's like different branding, it's different labeling. So this has to be fought philosophically.
Okay, thanks for a wonderful talk, Richard. I have a question about your matrix. Could you maybe elaborate briefly on feudalism? Is feudalism still a thing? Because you kind of have it on the matrix, but you didn't talk about it. So I was wondering, how does that fit into this classification? Do we still have this model today? Do you think it will come back? So what's your view on that? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm going to go to it as quickly as I can. Good question. Did you notice in the matrix I skipped over feudalism. What is feudalism? What is this? Public ownership, but private control. What? Now think of peasants on the manor. The peasants are privately controlling. It's a tenant system under feudalism. It's a medieval period. So, but the manor, the lords and the manors and the barons owned. This was the feudal system. But they let the farmers have some control over what they were planting and what they were harvesting, and they could keep some of it. How weird. But how would I classify it in today's world? Because feudalism is pre-capitalist. It's like from the 11th century, 12th century. But I would pump in there environmentalism. That's what environmentalism is. Environmentalism is modern day feudalism. It wants to return to a pre-industrial, pre-capitalist system. And the sooner we relabel the environmentalists medievalists, the better. The better, because not only is it a religion, but in terms of actual industry, you know, the idea that I said this earlier today, if your only energy menu was solar, wind, and biomass, which is burning logs, notice not coincidentally, those are all pre-industrial energy forms. They're the only kind they like. Every other energy that they oppose, fossils, oil was discovered when? In 1859. Nuclear, they're even against nuclear, even though it doesn't issue greenhouse gases. So what is the litmus test here? They hate anything that powers and feeds capital. Any power source which is so abundant and so reliable that it keeps the engines of capitalism going. That's what the environmentalists oppose. Meaning they're not for the clean air and clean planet, and they're anti-capitalist and medievalist. Does that help? Martin, that's a good question, yeah. Feudalism.
Thank you for your talk.
You're welcome.
I'm having a difficult time to understand the concept of ownership without control.
Uh-huh.
What is ownership if it's not controlled? What's left from ownership?
Yes, it just becomes you own the title, that's it. You own the title, and you have some benefits and rights that come with that. So suppose you're getting paid dividends. But the way I teach this in my classes is, if you say what is what is ownership of private property? There's actually 5 elements. You should have the right to earn it in the first place. Like sometimes you need to get a license from the government just to work. Occupational licensing. At minimum, you should be able to go work and make money, right? Okay, now once you have our property. So that's the first one, just the right to go make it. The next one would be consume it. So suppose you're an apple grower. You shouldn't have to get a license to go make apples. Once you make the apple, you should have the right to consume it, trade it, save it, invest it, right, in another, gift it to your kids. So even the right of inheritance, bequeathing, so there's like 4 or 5 elements to property, and all those can be trenched. They do this now. They have estate taxes, right, where they'll take half your property. So in a way, that's taking away, not in a way, in an exact way, it's taking away control of your property. You still, quote, own it, but we're going to tell you what to do with it. That's exactly, you can separate these two. I'm not sure why you're saying you can't imagine how the two can be separated. The tax system itself does that. It says, you made 100 million, we're going to take 50 of it. You obviously can't control that 50 anymore. So, and regulations themselves, when you think about it, the whole regulatory state, what they call the swamp today, these bureaucrats and all the alphabet agencies regulating, is the best manifestation of this phenomenon. What is the FDA, the FCC, the FAA, the EPA, the SEC? What are they doing but regulating, meaning mandating and telling you, either prohibiting or mandating, you do something with your business, your property, yourself. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, that would be a consistent case for ownership, to have all these other features of it. Other than that, it's just a title. It's literally just a piece of paper. Unless it's manifested in these 5 things fully, you can say basically, yes, you don't own it. So, okay, should we stop? Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for watching this video. At the Atlas Society, we are engaging 1 billion young minds with the ideas of Ayn Rand. You can help by tapping that subscribe button below or make a donation right here on YouTube or at atlassociety.org.